Imagine sitting in a cockpit made of canvas and wood, 5,000 feet in the air, with no parachute, a gun that jams every third shot, and an enemy on your tail who wants to burn you alive. Now, imagine doing all of that while you are blind in one eye. This isn't a movie script. This is the terrifying reality of the man who shouldn't have been there. The man the British military called garbage. The man they rejected. They said he was too old. They said he was too working class. They said his vision was so defective he shouldn't even be driving a car, let alone flying a fighter plane. But Mick Mannock didn't just talk his way into the cockpit. He lied his way in. And once he got up there, he realized that the gentleman's rules of air combat were a suicide pact. So he tore them up. He turned the sky into a slaughterhouse. He went from a vomiting, shaking mess that other pilots laughed at to the deadliest aerial assassin the British Empire had ever seen. 73 confirmed kills. 73 burning wrecks. This is the story of how a rejected outcast broke every single rule of war to become the ultimate nightmare for the enemy. To understand the sheer insanity of what Mick Mannock achieved, you first have to understand the world that rejected him. We are going back to the dawn of aerial warfare, a time when the British military establishment was obsessed with class, breeding, and the right sort of chap. If you wanted to fly for the Royal Flying Corps, you needed to be a gentleman from a public school with perfect eyesight and a stiff upper lip. Mick Mannock was none of those things. He was the son of a deserter, raised in crushing poverty, a fervent socialist who hated the aristocracy, and perhaps most disqualifying of all, he was nearly blind in his left eye. A childhood infection had left his vision clouded and practically useless for depth perception. In a world where judging the distance of an enemy plane meant the difference between life and death, Mannock was walking into the arena with one hand tied behind his back. When the war broke out in 1914, Mannock was rotting away in a Turkish prison camp where he had been working as a telephone engineer. The conditions were brutal. He was starved, beaten, and humiliated. By the time he was repatriated back to Britain in 1915, he was a skeleton of a man, angry, emaciated, and burning with a hatred for the enemy that most people couldn't comprehend. He immediately tried to join the Royal Army Medical Corps. Rejected. He tried the Royal Engineers. Rejected. They looked at his medical file, saw the defective left eye, and stamped UNFIT on his papers. For most men, that would be the end. You go home. You work in a factory, you survive. But Mannock wasn't trying to survive. He was trying to kill. He eventually managed to talk his way into the Royal Engineers as a junior officer. But the ground war wasn't enough for him. He looked up at the skies and saw the future. The Royal Flying Corps was desperate for bodies. The life expectancy of a new pilot in 1916 was measured in weeks, sometimes days. They needed meat for the grinder. Mannock saw his chance. He applied for a transfer to the RFC. Now, here is where the legend begins. The medical exam for pilots was rigorous. The eye test was the ultimate gatekeeper. There are a dozen stories about how he passed it. Some say he memorized the chart beforehand. Some say he charmed the doctor. But the most credible story is simply that he covered his bad eye with his hand, read the chart with his good eye, and then when the doctor asked him to cover the other eye, he simply swapped hands but covered the same bad eye again, tricking the examiner. It was a simple sleight of hand, a cheap trick, and with that one lie, the deadliest pilot of the war slipped through the net. But getting in was the easy part. Flight training was a disaster. You have to remember, these planes were not like the Spitfires or Mustangs of WWI. These were Newport Scouts, fragile kites made of wood, wire, and fabric, powered by rotary engines that spewed castor oil into the pilot's face. The torque of the engine was so strong that if you turned right too hard, the plane would flip over and spin into the ground. Mannock was older than the other recruits. He was 29, while most trainees were 18 or 19. They called him Grandpa. They mocked his accent. They mocked his intense, brooding silence. And in the air, he was terrible. His instructors noted that he was heavy-handed, clumsy, and worst of all, cautious. He wasn't a natural flyer. He struggled to land the plane without bouncing it across the grass like a stone on a pond. The humiliation didn't stop in the cockpit. In the mess hall, Mannock was an outcast. The RFC was a club for the elite, and Mannock was a socialist agitator who openly argued politics with his superiors. He didn't drink with them. He didn't laugh at their jokes. He sat in the corner, staring at maps, obsessively cleaning his pistol, muttering about germs and vermin. The other pilots thought he was weird. They thought he was a liability. When he was finally posted to No. 40 Squadron in France in April 1917, the reception was icy. The squadron commander saw a 29-year-old rookie with a bad attitude and shaky hands. On his very first combat patrol, Mannock did something that cemented his reputation as a coward. He lost the formation. He drifted away, got confused, and came back early. The whispers started immediately. Mannock's yellow. The old man has no spine. He's blind as a bat. For weeks, he flew patrol after patrol without firing a shot. He would land his plane, climb out, and his legs would be shaking so violently he could barely walk. He would go behind the hangar and vomit from the sheer terror of it. The other pilots watched him with disgust. They were knights of the air, chasing glory. Mannock looked like a nervous wreck who didn't belong. There was talk of transferring him out, sending him back to England in disgrace. He was on the razor's edge of being kicked out of the war entirely. He was failing. He was drowning in his own fear. But what nobody realized, what none of those posh boys in the mess hall understood, was that Mannock wasn't trembling because he was weak. He was trembling because he was forcing his brain to process a three-dimensional battlefield with two-dimensional vision. He wasn't running away. He was studying. He was watching the enemy. He was analyzing the angles, the sun, the wind, the blind spots. The coward was actually building a database of death in his mind. And then, one morning in May 1917, something snapped. The coward decided he was done watching. The rules of engagement said you engaged the enemy with honor. You dueled them. Mannock decided that honor was for idiots. He took off alone, spotted a German balloon observation unit, a heavily defended target surrounded by anti-aircraft aircraft guns. And instead of avoiding it, he dove. He broke the first rule. Never fly solo into a kill zone. But Mannock wasn't flying to fight. He was flying to murder. The transformation was about to begin, and nobody in 40 Squadron was ready for what Mick Mannock was about to become. The transition from coward to killer didn't happen overnight, but when it started, it was terrifyingly methodical. Mannock's first victory was almost an accident of rage. He was on a patrol, trailing behind as usual, when he spotted a German Albatros scout. The standard procedure, the rule, was to engage in a turning dogfight. You circle each other, loop, bank, and try to get on the enemy's tail. It was a dance. A chaotic, swirling dance. But Mannock knew he couldn't dance. His depth perception made close quarters turning fights a gamble he would lose. If he got too close and misjudged the distance by 10 feet, he would collide mid-air. So he rewrote the rulebook right there in the cockpit. He decided that the fair fight was for losers. Instead of turning with the German, Mannock climbed. He climbed until his engine was screaming, and the air was thin. He positioned himself directly in the sun, blinding anyone who looked up. He waited. He watched the German pilot below him, comfortable, unsuspecting. Mannock didn't dive immediately. He waited until the German was distracted, banking away. Then, he dropped. He didn't just dive, he fell out of the sky like a stone. He held his fire. The manuals said to fire from 100 yards. Mannock waited. 80 yards, 50 yards, 30 yards. He was so close he could see the rivets on the enemy's fuselage. He pulled the trigger of his Lewis gun for a short, violent burst. The German plane didn't just get hit, it disintegrated. The fuel tank ruptured, and the pilot was incinerated in a heartbeat. Mannock pulled up, the G-forces crushing him into his seat, and watched the burning wreck tumble. One pass. One kill. No dogfight. No glory. Just an execution. When he landed, he didn't celebrate. He walked into the mess hall, sat down, and ate his dinner in silence. The other pilots were confused. "Did you get one, Mick?" they asked. He just nodded. "I shot the swine down in flames." There was no joy in his voice. Just cold satisfaction. This was the birth of his obsession. Mannock realized that his lack of depth perception didn't matter if he never let the enemy see him. If he attacked from behind, from above, and at point-blank range, he didn't need to judge distance. He just needed to be close enough to not miss. But the rejection and the mockery from his own squadron didn't stop immediately. He was still the outsider. To prove himself, he had to do it again. And again. He began to spend hours at the gunnery range. While other pilots were drinking champagne or chasing French girls in the local villages, Mannock was at the butts, aligning his sights. He realized that the factory settings on the guns were garbage. They were calibrated for a distance that gave the enemy too much time to react. Mannock recalibrated his own guns. He spent hours mixing his ammunition belts. The standard load was a mix of ball and tracer. Mannock obsessively checked every single bullet for imperfections. A jammed gun meant death. He would sit in his tent, sweat dripping off his nose, polishing rounds with a rag, talking to himself. This one is for the engine. This one is for the pilot. He started breaking the flight rules, of formation flying. In 1917, British tactics were rigid. You flew in a V formation. You followed the leader. You stayed in line. It was designed to look impressive and disciplined. Mannock realized it was a target practice arrangement for the Germans. The Germans, led by the Red Baron's flying circus, flew in loose, hunting packs. They were flexible. The British were stiff. Mannock started arguing with his commanders. "We are sitting ducks!" he would scream. "We need to fly loose! We need to look everywhere!" His commanders told him to shut up and fly the line. Mannock ignored them. In the air, he started drifting wide, bobbing up and down, checking his blind spots constantly. He looked paranoid, but that paranoia saved his life a dozen times. While his squadron mates were getting bounced and shot down because they were staring at the back of the leader's head, Mannock was spotting the enemy 3 miles away. His kill count started to tick upward. 2 kills. 5 kills. He became an ace. But with the kills came a darkness. Mannock wasn't just shooting down planes, he was hunting men. He developed a visceral hatred for the Germans. He called them and vermin, with a venom that made even hardened soldiers uncomfortable. One evening, after shooting down a German 2-seater, he visited the crash site. The bodies of the German pilot and observer were mangled, crushed into the earth. Most pilots avoided the crash sites. It was too real. Mannock went specifically to see it. He reportedly looked at the twisted bodies and said, "The swine are better off dead." It wasn't bravado. It was a coping mechanism. He had to dehumanize them to keep doing what he was doing. By the summer of 1917, the reject was becoming a problem for the enemy. He was flying the SE.5 now, a faster, sturdier machine than the Newport. It suited his brutal style. It was a gun platform, stable and fast in a dive. Mannock used it like a sledgehammer. He stopped caring about what his squadron thought of him and started caring about how to kill more efficiently. He began to mentor the younger pilots, the new rejects, who arrived terrified and green. He saw himself in them. He took them aside and taught them the rules of survival. Always above, he told them. Seldom on the same level. Never underneath. It became his mantra. It was the antithesis of the gallant duel. It was the predator's creed. But the pressure was mounting. The shaking hadn't stopped. In fact, it was getting worse. After every patrol, Mannock's hands would tremble so violently he couldn't light his own cigarette. He developed a tic in his face. He wasn't sleeping. He would wake up screaming from nightmares of burning planes. The psychological toll of being a reject, who forced himself to be a hero, was cracking him open. He was fighting 2 wars, one against the Germans, and one against his own nervous system. And as the summer turned to autumn, Mannock was about to face a test that would either break him completely or turn him into a legend. The bloody month of bloody April was over, but the air war was about to get much, much darker. By late 1917, the air war had evolved. It was no longer about individual skill, it was about industrial efficiency. And Mick Mannock, the man rejected for his eyesight, had become the most efficient machine in the Royal Flying Corps. He had proven he could kill. Now, he wanted to prove he could lead. But the establishment still didn't trust him. He was still the socialist agitator, with the bad eye. Despite his growing score, now in the double digits, he was passed over for promotion repeatedly. Men with half his talent, but better family names were given commands. This fueled a rage in Mannock that was terrifying to behold. He didn't just want to beat the Germans. He wanted to outshine every single officer who had looked down on him. He began to study the tactics of the enemy with the obsession of a scientist. He realized that the great German aces like Richthofen, the Red Baron, were successful not because they were better pilots, but because they were better hunters. They used bait. They used the sun. They picked off the weak. Mannock decided to perfect these tactics. He developed the decoy strategy. He would take a rookie pilot, tell him to fly slightly lower and slower than the rest of the flight, making him look like a straggler, a wounded bird. The German hunters, always looking for an easy kill, would dive on the rookie, and waiting above, hovering in the blinding glare of the sun, was Mannock. As soon as the Germans committed to the dive, Mannock would drop on them. It was cruel. It was ruthless. It used his own men as live bait. But it worked. The Germans would fall into the trap, and Mannock would tear them apart. This was where he truly broke the rules of British chivalry. The British command frowned upon unsporting behavior. They wanted aggressive patrolling, yes, but using your own wingmen as bait. That was seen as ungentlemanly. Mannock didn't care. Good flying is not about looping the loop. He told his men. It is about killing the Hun and getting home for tea. He stripped away the romance of flight. He taught his pilots to aim for the cockpit, not the engine. Kill the pilot, and the plane is just wood and wire, he said. He taught them to verify the kill. Follow him down. Make sure he burns. His aggression in the air was matched by his intensity on the ground. He became a father figure to his flight, despite his neurotic behavior. He protected them fiercely. If a new pilot was struggling, Mannock would take him up for solo practice, flying wingtip to wingtip, talking him through the maneuvers. He had a strange duality. He was a cold-blooded killer to the enemy, but a deeply caring, almost motherly figure to his own chicks. He knew the odds. He knew most of them would be dead in 3 weeks. He tried to give them every dirty trick in the book, to buy them an extra day of life. He taught them to twist their necks constantly. If you aren't looking behind you, you are already dead. He'd bark. He physically grabbed pilots by the neck in the mess hall and twisted their heads around to drill the habit into them. But the rejected label still haunted him. He felt he had to do more. He started flying multiple patrols a day. While others rested, Mannock went back up. He was hunting numbers now. He wanted to be the top scorer, not for vanity, though he had a massive ego, but for validation. He wanted to shove his victory tally in the faces of the medical board that failed him. He wanted to prove that a one-eyed Irish socialist was worth 10 public school boys. This drive made him reckless. He began to engage massive formations of enemy aircraft. It wasn't uncommon for Mannock to lead a flight of 6 planes against 20 Germans. Most commanders would retreat. Mannock attacked. He relied on shock and awe. He would lead ahead, on charge, firing tracers straight into the faces of the enemy swarm, scattering them like pigeons. Then, in the chaos, the blind. Pilot would pick his targets. There was a specific incident that showcased his growing madness and brilliance. He spotted a German two-seater reconnaissance plane protected by 5 scouts. The rules said, "Don't engage heavy odds alone." Mannock signaled his flight to stay high and cover him. He dove, alone, into the 6 enemy planes. He slashed through their formation, firing short, controlled bursts. He shot the observer in the two-seater first, silencing the rear gun. Then he pulled up into a loop, came down behind one of the scouts, and blew its wing off. The other 4 scouts, panicked by the ferocity of this lone attacker, scattered. Mannock then leisurely went back to the defenseless two-seater and finished it off. It was a display of dominance that left his squadron mates speechless. He returned to base with holes in his wings and a grim smile. "Two less vermin," he muttered. But the cracks were widening. His hands were now permanently shaking. He developed a phobia of burning to death. He started carrying a revolver in his cockpit, not for the enemy, but for himself. "If I catch fire," he told a friend, "I won't go down cooking. I'll put a bullet in my brain." He obsessively checked his fuel lines before every flight. He watched friends die in flames, screaming as they fell, and it terrified him more than anything. The rejected ace was becoming a legend, but the man inside the flight suit was falling apart. He was a tightly wound spring, vibrating with tension, held together only by hate and adrenaline. And the war was far from over. 1918 was coming, and with it, the final, bloody crescendo of his life. The dawn of 1918 brought the German spring offensive, a massive, desperate push by the enemy to win the war, before the Americans arrived in force. The sky was thick with targets. For Mick Mannock, this was harvest season. He had finally been given command of a flight in the prestigious No. 74 Tiger Squadron. This was his chance to mold a unit in his own image. No more, gentlemen. No more sportsmanship. He turned 74 Squadron into a pack of wolves. His briefing to his new pilots was short and brutal. "Gentlemen, the enemy is below us. We are going to go down there and kill them. No prisoners. No mercy." Under his leadership, 74 Squadron became the scourge of the Western Front. Mannock's personal score skyrocketed. He was shooting down planes daily, sometimes 2 or 3 a day. He had mastered the deflection shot, the art of aiming ahead of a moving target so the bullets and the plane arrived at the same point in space. For a man with one good eye, this was a mathematical miracle. He flew by instinct, by feel, sensing the speed and angle of the enemy. He stopped using his sights for close range. He just knew where the bullets would go. He was like a jazz musician improvising in the key of death. But the rules he broke weren't just tactical. They were psychological. He encouraged a competitive bloodlust among his men. He kept a scoreboard. He chided pilots who claimed damaged planes. "Did you see it crash?" he would demand. "Did you see the flames? If not, it's not a kill." He forced them to be ruthless. Yet, he was also incredibly generous. There are numerous recorded instances where Mannock would cripple an enemy plane, riddle it with bullets, until it was a smoking ruin, and then radio or signal a rookie pilot to finish it off. He would let the new kid get the kill credit to boost his confidence. "I have enough medals," Mannock would say. "Give the boy a taste of blood." This created a fanatical loyalty. His men worshipped him. They would follow him into the gates of hell, because they knew he would feed them victories. However, the stress was eating him alive. He developed a deep, melancholic depression. He would sit in the mess staring at the wall for hours. The shakes were now visible to everyone. He couldn't hold a cup of tea without spilling it. He was suffering from severe combat fatigue, what we now call PTSD. But there was no tapping out. The war was at its peak. He wrote letters home that were dark and foreboding. He felt a premonition of his own death. "I won't last much longer," he told a fellow ace, Ira Jones. "I've used up all my luck." Yet, every morning, he climbed back into his SE.5A, checked his revolver, wiped the oil from his goggles, and took off to kill again. His tactics became even more aggressive. He started attacking German airfields. He would lead his squadron low, strafing the hangars and mechanics on the ground. This was incredibly dangerous. Ground fire was lethal. But Mannock wanted to destroy the enemy at the source. He wanted to break their spirit. He broke the rule of altitude, always above, to conduct these low-level raids because he hated the enemy so much he wanted to see them run. This hatred was his fuel. He once said, "I want to shoot down every German plane I see. I want to clear the sky." It wasn't about strategy anymore, it was personal. By June 1918, he was promoted to major and given command of No. 85 Squadron. He was now one of the highest-ranking aces in the British Empire. The Reject was now a celebrity. Generals wanted to meet him. Newspapers wanted his photo. Mannock hated it. He hated the brass. He hated the fame. He just wanted to fly. But 85 Squadron was a mess when he took over. Low morale, high casualties. Mannock went in like a whirlwind. He fired incompetent officers. He drilled the men relentlessly. Within weeks, 85 Squadron was racking up kills. Mannock led from the front, taking the most dangerous positions, shielding his men with his own aircraft. He was a guardian angel with a machine gun. But the physical cost was undeniable. He had aged 10 years in 10 months. His hair was thinning, his face was gaunt. His eyes were sunken and haunted. He was 31 years old but looked 50. He was running on pure nervous energy. He knew the end was coming. He could feel it. The blind pilot had seen too much. And the one rule he had always preached, never fly too low, was the one rule that tempted him every day. The ground was calling him. July 1918, the final summer of the war. The heat was oppressive, and the stench of death wafted up from the trenches to the altitude where Mannock hunted. By now, his official tally was climbing into the 60s. He was approaching the record held by the Red Baron, 80 kills. The competition for the title of top ace was fierce, but Mannock claimed he didn't care. "The only score that matters is the number of Huns who don't go home," he said. Yet, his diary entries from this time show a man obsessed with the count. He was driven by a need to validate his existence through destruction. On one patrol, Mannock broke every safety regulation in the book. He spotted a massive formation of German Fokker D.Vs, the deadliest fighter of the war. They heavily outnumbered his flight. Instead of climbing for advantage, Mannock did the unthinkable. He attacked from below. It was suicide. The rule was that height is life. Attacking from below meant you were slow, exposed, and fighting gravity. But Mannock knew something the Germans didn't. The Fokker D. Via had a blind spot directly underneath its tail. He crept up in that blind spot, invisible hanging on his propeller. He got within 20 yards of the leader. He fired a 2-second burst directly into the belly of the enemy plane. The German aircraft exploded. Before the debris even cleared, Mannock had rolled over and dived away, vanishing into the clouds before the other Germans knew what happened. It was the move of a ghost. He had turned a disadvantage into a weapon. He was now killing with a frequency that terrified his own mechanics. They could barely re-arm his plane fast enough. He would land, yell, reload, smoke a cigarette with trembling hands while the ground crew worked, and take off again. He was a man possessed. He shot down 3 planes in a single day. Then 4. He was a force of nature. The rejected pilot was now the deadliest weapon in the RAF's arsenal. But the strange thing was, he never bragged. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He would sit in the mess hall, listening to a violin record on the gramophone, tears streaming down his face. The dichotomy of the savage killer and the weeping, sensitive soul was heartbreaking to witness. He began to take insane risks to confirm kills. If a plane went down in German territory, credit was often denied unless it was witnessed by ground troops or other pilots. Mannock, furious at being denied credit for kills he knew he made, started following his victims down to the ground. He would dive after the burning wreck, watching it impact, just to be sure. This was the most dangerous thing a pilot could do. As you got lower, the Archie-C anti-aircraft fired, and machine gun fire from the trenches became intense. A lucky rifle bullet could kill you. Mannock knew this. He preached against it. Never follow a victim down to the deck, he told his rookies. It's a trap. But he stopped listening to his own advice. His ego, his obsession, and his fatalism were pushing him to break his own golden rule. There was a sense of finality in his actions. He gave away his personal belongings. He wrote final letters. He told his friend Ira Jones, "They'll get me soon. I can feel the flames." He was haunted by the image of the burning pilot. He started carrying a spare pistol, just in case the first one jammed, if he had to commit suicide in a burning cockpit. The psychological burden of 70 Wobb's murders was crushing him. He wasn't a psychopath. He was a man who felt everything, but killed anyway. That is what made him so effective and so tragic. The turning point of his demise began on July 20th. A close friend of his was killed. Mannock went into a cold rage. He went up and slaughtered 2 Germans in retaliation. But it brought him no peace. He was spiraling. The system that had rejected him now hailed him as a hero, but he despised them more than ever. He felt they had turned him into a monster and were now clapping as he destroyed himself. He was the gladiator in the arena, and the crowd was cheering for his death. And then came the morning of July 26, 1918. Mannock woke up early. He looked tired. He told a young pilot, Donald Inglis, "Come with me. I'll get you a Hun." It was supposed to be a training flight. A simple patrol. Mannock wanted to gift a kill to the new kid. He was playing the mentor one last time. They took off into the gray dawn, the roar of the engines drowning out the doubts in Mannock's head. He didn't know it, but he had just taken off for the last time. The legend of the 73 kills was complete, but the bill was about to come due. July 26, 1918. The sky was clear. Mannock and the young New Zealander, Donald Inglis, crossed the lines. Mannock was flying his SE.5A, leading the way. They spotted a German two-seater LVG reconnaissance plane. It was an easy target for an ace like Mannock. But true to his generous nature, Mannock didn't take the kill immediately. He maneuvered around it, firing short bursts to suppress the rear gunner, effectively serving the German plane up on a silver platter for Inglis. He signaled the rookie, "Take him." Inglis dove and fired. He hit the German's fuel tank. The plane burst into flames. It began its death spiral towards the trenches. It was a confirmed kill for the rookie. A textbook Mannock assist. The job was done. The safe, smart move now was to turn for home, stay high, and celebrate. But Mannock didn't turn. He broke his own rule. The golden rule. Never follow them down. Maybe he wanted to confirm the crash. Maybe he was mesmerized by the fire. Maybe he just wanted to see the enemy destroyed one last time. He dove after the falling wreckage. He followed it down to 2,000 feet. Then 1,000 feet. He was dangerously low over the German trenches. The soldiers on the ground looked up and saw the British plane. Hundreds of rifles and machine guns turned skyward. The air filled with lead. It was a wall of fire. Inglis, following behind, watched in horror. He saw Mannock's plane level out, then suddenly, jerk. A massive volley of ground fire had struck the engine or the cockpit. A thin wisp of blue smoke appeared from the side of Mannock's machine. Then, the blue smoke turned black. Then, it turned into a tongue of orange flame. Fire. Mannock's greatest fear. The nightmare he had woken up screaming from for 2 years. He was burning. Inglis watched as the plane began a slow, gentle left-hand turn. It wasn't a violent spin. It was the drift of a dying bird. The nose dropped. The flames engulfed the cockpit. Did Mannock use his revolver? Did he put that bullet in his brain to escape the agony? We will never know. The plane continued its slow descent until it impacted the ground behind German lines. It exploded in a ball of fire. Donald Inglis, his own plane riddled with bullets, barely made it back to the British lines. He crashed, landed and stumbled out, shouting, "The Major is down. Mick is down." The news hit the squadron like a physical blow. Nobody could believe it. Mannock, the invincible, the man who saw everything, dead. The rejected pilot who had conquered the air was gone. Shot down not by a better pilot, but by a nameless infantryman with a rifle. The irony was bitter. The king of the air was killed by the ground. His body was reportedly recovered by German soldiers. They found his identification tags. They buried him close to where he fell. But in the chaos of the retreating German army and the constant shelling of the area, his grave was lost. To this day, Mick Mannock has no known grave. The man with 73 victories. Some sources say 61, some say 73. Mannock himself claimed more in his diary, simply vanished into the mud of France. The pilot, who was rejected for being blind, had seen more than any of them, and then disappeared into history. The aftermath of Mannock's death was a strange mix of grief and administrative chaos. Because he had been so generous with his kills, giving them away to rookies. His official score was a mess. The RAF credited him with 61 victories. But his squadron mates, checking diaries and combat reports, insisted the number was 73. Some even argued it was higher, perhaps over 80, which would make him the ace of aces, surpassing Billy Bishop. The number, 73, became the legend. It was the number that defined his brilliance and his tragedy. But the true legacy of Mick Mannock wasn't the number. It was the method. He changed how air war was fought. Before Mannock, it was justing. After Mannock, it was science. His rules, always above, seldom on the same level, never underneath, became the Bible of fighter combat. They were taught to pilots in WW Douglas Bader, Sailor Milan, the heroes of the Battle of Britain. They were all spiritual students of Mick Mannock. The rejected pilot had written the textbook that saved Britain 20 years later. Even in death, the establishment that rejected him was slow to honor him. It took a year of lobbying by his friends before he was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest military decoration. When the medal was presented to his family, it was a reminder of where he came from. He didn't have a wealthy estate. His medals went to his father, the deserter, and his siblings who lived in working-class obscurity. The man who ruled the skies was still, in the eyes of the class system, a nobody. But to the pilots, he was God. His story is a brutal lesson in the cost of war. He wasn't a hero in the comic book sense. He was a broken, neurotic, terrified man who channeled his fear into efficiency. He showed that you don't have to be fearless to be brave. You just have to do the job while you're terrified. He showed that the ruthless of society, who is fit, who is worthy, who is officer material, are absolute garbage when the bullets start flying. The blind man saw the truth of war clearer than the generals with $20 vision. So, what do we learn from the boy from the slums who burned 73 planes out of the sky? We learn that rejection is just an opinion. Mick Mannock was told no by every institution that mattered. He was told he was physically unfit, socially unacceptable, and mentally unstable. And he proved them all wrong by becoming the most dangerous man in the air. But we also learn the terrible price of that obsession. Mannock didn't survive the war to enjoy his glory. He didn't get a parade. He got a fiery grave in a muddy field. He gave everything, his sanity, his youth, his life, to a war that treated him like a number. Today, if you look at the list of top British aces, you will see names like Billy Bishop and McCudden. But whisper the name, Mannock, to a historian, and you will see a nod of respect. He was the pilot's pilot, the dark genius, the one-eyed executioner. He broke the rules of flight, the rules of his class, and the rules of medical science. He forced the world to acknowledge him through the sheer force of his violence. In the end, Mick Mannock's life wasn't a tragedy, it was a supernova. He burned too bright, too hot, and too fast. He was a creature of the war, created by it and consumed by it. As you sit here, safe on the ground, remember him. Remember the shaking hands lighting a cigarette. Remember the vomit behind the hangar. Remember the one good eye scanning the sun. And remember that the greatest ace of the British Empire was the man they tried to throw in the trash. The next time someone tells you that you aren't good enough, or you don't fit the profile, or you should just give up, think of Mick Mannock. And then go climb into your cockpit, aim for the sun, and burn the rule book.